Into our discussions. What part of the film resonated most with you, and why?
Can we talk, or do we just put it in the chat box?
Oh no, this is.
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, you can talk. Yeah, you can talk or put it in the chat. It's just some people are comfortable in different ways. So I just wanted to let folks know that we'll be looking in the chat in case people want to contribute there. But yes, feel free to talk. Open discussion. Yes.
And I'll put the question in the chat so that folks have it there too.
Okay. What resonated with me greatly was some of the attitudes of the early 60s that were expressed in the movie still seem pretty relevant today. Over time, and I remember some of those things on TV, the things that he went through and the marches and stuff. So I'm old. But some of the attitudes, now I've seen it hidden in the past few years, in the decades, but it's always been there. But this year with the pandemic, it seemed to me that those same attitudes just really bloomed and became much more public, and people felt comfortable expressing those feelings again of superiority and that kind of thing. So I was really disappointed, but realistically, I've seen it. So that's what impacted me.
Thank you, Debbie. Can you just a quick question by attitudes and different things? Can you be a little explicit? Like, what do you mean specifically?
Okay, when he had, and I'm trying to go back to find the basic wording, but just that there's no reason that Blacks should not have rights. That this is just the natural order of things, and we don't want to give them. They shouldn't be able to be up in front of the bus. They shouldn't be able to have the same kind of rights. And I was very surprised. I think it was a governor that had said that. I don't remember from which state, but I just saw that so vividly this past summer. And it's been growing in the last 4 years, but it's still, the last 4 years, you saw people feel more comfortable expressing those same feelings again. But it's not like they weren't there before. They were just, they were hidden. It wasn't politically correct to say it. So they kept it to themselves, although we know at least I know in many situations when I was in a family situation or a friend situation, people had no problem expressing their prejudices, but they wouldn't say it too publicly. And any kind of public person would not express it. But just the fact that Blacks should just be, they're not as intelligent as us, and they should not have the same rights. I think that's, I'll save my opinion, but I just think that those attitudes are still there since the 60s and since the 1800s and since the 1700s. I mean, they're there. A lot more people, and I'm really counting on the younger generation because I see a lot of hope in that. But it's very difficult when you're in a situation, and always controversial, because when someone says a off-color joke, I always stand up to it and say, hey, that's just not right, and that kind of thing. But I'm always the controversial person, and so I'm always viewed that way. And you're bleeding heart liberal, that type of thing. But that's okay. That's who I am. But it's just always been there. So those are the things specifically.
Thank you, Debbie.
Hi, Anna. This is Carol. I'm moving to where I'm now looking back at the screen. But I think to just go off of what Debbie's saying, I've not had an opportunity to screen the video yet, but those thoughts and feelings, somewhere recently, people feel they've been given permission to express that out loud. Where Debbie was saying, yes, in a family situation or private with friends, or people felt comfortable saying those things but wouldn't in public. But somewhere a flip has switched, seemingly, where a larger group somewhere feels they've been given permission to say those things out loud again. And our past year, things built up in a pressure cooker that seemed to really explode this spring and summer. And I feel like a lot of what I witnessed on the news and saw in the news are things that Debbie saw in the news in the 60s.
Mhm.
It seems so incredibly unreal, where maybe over time we have blindly, and I actually said this to a friend the other day, I can live in my own little rose-colored version of the world where I'm around friends who are like-minded, who accept people who are different than you, religion, race, color, sexual orientation, any of those things. I can surround myself with people who are like-minded, and it's very easy to forget when you step out of your bubble that there are so many hateful thoughts and feelings towards people that are different. And just somewhere, it just seems like it exploded.
Yeah, Carol, when what you said there reminded me, there's something that I believe is said in the film itself, is our past is not past.
Right.
And that gets at the heart of what you're saying and what you've felt and what you've seen. And I think that if and as you have time to watch the film, you'll see very explicitly some of those things again that Debbie was talking about too, that continue to echo. But I think also, to Debbie's point about hope in a new and younger generation of activism, they understand there's so much yet to do. There's so much more work to be done.
I even think there's a point to that when you say with that, there's a point to that if you see, and I think television is a great influencer, more than we realize. But if you see in ads in television shows, mixed couples are almost the norm now, which at one time it would have been, I mean, absolutely not. So I do believe a lot of that is influencing the younger generation. And I think that's good. Do I think it should be always? No, because that's not, I remember one of my friends' dad said to me one time, well, I don't want my daughter to marry a white man. I want my family to stay Black. And that's typically what most parents see that as. They would prefer that, staying within your own culture, but that's not the way it's going to be. And so I do think it's good that we have that mix of influence.
I think it's interesting, the point that you just brought up, Debbie. At one point in time, it was illegal for people to have interracial relationships, and also during earlier parts of, during slavery, white slave owners raped enslaved African women to create more babies so that they can continue to expand their slave holdings. And so I think, like, I hear what you're saying, but I think there's a there's a slight difference between, I think for me as a Black woman, a Black parent telling you, hey, I don't want my children to marry a white person because of the historical context that's there. That's very different than it is in a white family.
I think what I have seen lately that, and again, I'll tell, I have not seen the video yet, but what I've seen lately that concerns me and angers me at the same time is what happened at the Capitol recently and how Congress jumped right on prosecuting these people for what they did. And I don't condone what they did, but why did they not jump on the same thing, the same bandwagon, when all of these officers or anybody were killing Black people and nothing was done like Congress did because they were being attacked? I'm going to jump right on this and we're going to prosecute, but they didn't do that, or didn't, at least not as heartily as they did when they were protecting themselves, as they did when they wanted to protect people of color that were attacked. That's what angers me, that there's still that divide, even in our Congress and our government. Even though they can say, oh, we think that's wrong, but they sure didn't jump on it and do anything about it, like they did when they were under attack. So, I mean, that really concerns me and like I said, angers me.
Thanks everyone for sharing just some thoughts from the chat that go back to the question of what resonated in the film. Just sharing some of the things that people shared in the chat. Frank said for him it was seeing John Lewis as beyond a politician, so getting more of a glimpse into his personal life and his personal inspirations. Tessa mentioned the historian finding his great-great-grandfather's voting registration documentation and no other family members until John was quite remarkable. So that gap in voting registration that was found there. And then Leo said the guts, the strength, the bravery of those freedom fighters and marchers, amazing. So again, that echoes back to the comments that we've been talking about. Is some of the actions that we saw taken in the 1960s are the same as what we've seen happening just in the last year. Carol also mentioned John Lewis getting steamrolled on the bridge was another moment on the Pettus Bridge. So just some thoughts there from the chat. I see Josh has his hand up, so we'll go to Josh.
Hey, great film. Sorry, I'm joining the conversation here a few minutes late, and so I don't know if this was mentioned already. So I had a couple thoughts watching it. I mean, I learned a lot of new things from watching it, but I think, the imagery of some of the old footage back from the 60s of people getting beat up, the feelings that it brought on for me were some of the more impactful things from this. The seeing people waving the Confederate flags, waiting for the freedom fighters to get off the bus. That really it sickened me seeing that. And one particular moment in the film that really resonated with me was when they were talking about the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville, and when they were talking about it being an achievement to allow it to be permissible for white and Black people to eat together at a lunch counter. So not even, making people, making it a law to integrate, but just allowing Black and white people to sit down together in a public place. I mean, it's something heard and learned many times, but, you know, just hearing it said, it struck me again like I had never heard it before. And so I think the film was, you know, really powerful and well done. And I think just the feelings it gave me, in addition to the historical facts, really resonated.
Thanks, Josh. I see Dan has a hand up as well.
Yeah, just when Josh was talking about the lunch counter thing, one of the persons in the documentary said, as soon as we went in there, we knew it was over. And the confidence and power that they had with their movement was amazing. And then I was thinking back, like early on in his life, they were talking about John as a boy and how his family recognized him as being different, and his brother's like, look, I'm going to work double so this young man can go to school. And you know, he was just so special, and the power that he had throughout his entire life, people that were around him stayed around him decades. You know, his people stayed close to him and were loyal to him because he was such a special person. And then at the end, with Obama saying to him on 2 separate occasions, this is because of you. You know, it was just mind-boggling to think of the impact and the power that this one person had and how special he was.
Thanks, Dan. Any other moments of the film that stood out to anyone else that they wanted to mention?
Okay. Marion, if you want to go first, I can wait.
I guess I'm going to sound a lot like the psychologist I am, but I loved the consistency of his personality over time. You know, how his sisters said about him, oh, John, he was just always so busy. You know, I loved how he preached to the chickens as a child, and he always had so much energy for spreading his message. And to see him at the end of his life, you know, when he was so active and going and campaigning for these young politicians, and then the enormous legacy of his impact on people like AOC and younger Congress people who were having sit-ins with him, and they wanted to like lob verbal aggression at the people they were mad at and say, shame on you. And he said, no, that's not how this works. So he was, you know, consistently devoted to that like non-violent, non-aggressive path. And just what a tremendous legacy. I mean, he worked at it his whole life, and his legacy was huge.
I think for me, I was personally moved by watching him, just the resolve he had and the confidence he had, and felt a little shamed at my own self, you know, that I have been probably, I feel a lot of those things, but I'm not very vocal about it. And so I have 4 kids who are, and it sometimes causes a divide in the family. And so I ended up texting them all while I was watching it and said, you know, I just want to say I'm really proud of all of you for using your voice. And I know it's not easy all the time. And I do have some hope for that next generation too. And, you know, it's kind of like you instill some of that in them, but boy, they've taken it to another level. And so just really moved by his resolve and not fearing. You know, that was a powerful part of this for me.
Thank you, Joan. Marion, did you want to?
I was just going to say, I also took from it the power of telling stories, you know, the way he would tell some of the same stories in that scene near the end when he was there with his staff and he was talking about the chickens and they could almost recite it with him. That to me had a big impact. Like, yes, we have to use our voices, but we have to understand the power of a story, and he seems to have mastered that.
I would agree. I see Dan and Tamara's hand up, so.
I need to unhand somehow.
Okay. Tamara, your hand still up?
Yeah, I guess what was telling to me was, I mean, I think we all knew about the voter suppression that has gone on, way back then as well as right now. And what kind of hit me was how collectively the white population this year all raised up when we felt like there was the election was being stolen, whether there was any evidence of that or not. But the fact that there's clear evidence of voter suppression going on all the time. And, when the black belt in Georgia, was questioned so heavily in this election, there's no way that could have happened. Well, it's because of voter suppression for so many years. And just realizing how this has gone back for generations. And, how is it that we can question the election now, but all these other years, we've never questioned the election with the amount of voter suppression that's gone on.
Thank you, Tamara. I think that's a perfect segue to our next question. So before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed, literacy tests and other methods of voter suppression were used to prevent Black people and other people of color from voting. Reflecting on today's laws and accepted norms, are there policies that you feel are unjust or inequitable? Why?
Person, Ellie, is trying to speak, but I think you haven't figured out how to raise your hand.
Yeah, that would be me. Okay, so one of the things that I think is really restrictive and prevents a lot of people from being able to vote is having to work on that day. I really feel like there needs to be more support, especially for people in lower income or like grocery shopper and gas station attendants, things like that. I think that making this small slot of time available for your vote to get in disadvantages a lot of people who deserve a chance to vote like anybody else.
I hear you. Them lines, I was seeing pictures of people in line for hours, and that was for the early voting. And I could just imagine the day of, it was a hot mess.
And we can do better. We know we can. So the fact that we're not is hugely frustrating.
Yes.
I think another part of voter suppression is that feels very endemic culturally and also in our education system that might be relevant to folks who are involved in education, either through extension or in your communities or at Purdue, is to think about the ways that education is often divorced from civic engagements, or where education is impractical to people's lived experiences, and how making sure that education is tied to civic engagements, community leadership, and being involved in our communities can go a really long way to normalizing voting and participating and movement building for increasing voter access across the board. And I think, there's obviously a lot of structural things that contribute to voter suppression, but part of that also has to be in our daily lives. How are we contributing to making sure people are educated and know how to discern fact from fiction and participate in the systems and advocate for better systems?
Thank you, Sky. I see a couple things in the chat here. Here we go. So Vicky shared that voter suppression makes them angry and that all voices need to be heard via the vote. Frank said gerrymandering. And that's a big one. Kevin shared that mail-in voting rules kind of fall in line with that as well. And Vicky agreed with you, Ellie, that Election Day should be a paid holiday. Tessa, whoever wants to speak, come on in. Or maybe not. Okay. Tessa stated that continued challenges to access information about local races and candidates to make informed decisions at the polls as well. And Sonia stated that they saw an excerpt from Mitch McConnell where he vocalized opposition to the voters' rights bill because it promoted a paid day off to vote. And some more info. Ooh, a lot of comments. Thank you. Sky shared about oh, that's a big one. Sky shared about disenfranchisement of incarcerated persons, which is interesting because Florida did pass a law in their last election cycle, but after the voters approved it, then their state government said that people now had to pay whatever back monies were owed, but they also didn't have a way of actually knowing what back monies were owed. And so it was a big kerfuffle. There were a lot of people that were trying to raise funds to increase, to be able to pay off debts, but no one really knew what debts were owed and to whom. Kurt says a photo ID in Texas has one absentee drop-off box per county. And Sis Patrice says, as a Christian, I find it hard to understand how other Bible-believing Christians can read the Bible, know the Bible, but still advocate that white Christians are better than non-white Christians. According to Genesis, God made one man, then one woman. Clearly, we all stem from Adam and Eve, right? It's an interesting thing to think about. I think religion was used a lot, especially I'm hearing a lot about it more in the last couple of years. And then Mary Jo talked about open polling places in Arizona. If someone has something to say, please jump in. I'm just wanting to make sure that the comments in the chat are shared. One polling place in Arizona that they could vote in their and that in Arizona they could vote in anywhere in their county. It was super convenient. You just find a spot on their route home from work, try to make it to an assigned spot, versus trying to make it to an assigned spot like in Indiana. They were also sent mock ballots and booklets and things like that. And I remember I'm from California, we got mock ballots and all kinds of stuff. So I would practice what I wanted to do before I had to go in and do it. It was helpful. And language barriers.
Hi, Anna.
Yes.
This is Liz.
Yes.
Having worked at elections for voting for the last 30 plus years, as I've also been a Purdue employee, I've seen lots of changes over time. I'm going to agree with Sky definitely about educating people about what the voter regulations laws are for your state, because everybody needs to keep in mind, as we've kind of discussed here a little bit without coming right out of it, state elections are ran by the state. They're not federal. So every state has different rules and regulations, and you need to know what they are for your state and then also for your county. Because here in Tippecanoe County, we have gone to the vote centers where you can vote anywhere in Tippecanoe County as long as you're registered at Tippecanoe County. You no longer have to go to your local church or school or whatever. But there are still counties within the state of Indiana where you still have to go to your local one, because even though the states run it, counties still have some control over how it works. But I find it I go and I help every year. And like I said, I've been doing it for multiple years because I like to see the process work. If you walk through the door, the one that I'm working at, I will do everything I can to get somebody who's legally eligible to vote. But don't come in and ask me, can you tell me about the candidates? If you're there standing there ready to vote, you should have already have done your research. I've had people come in and say, my floor RA told me I could bring in my Virginia absentee ballot and turn it in here. At that point, it's too late. So for me, the education is a big part of knowing who it is you want to vote for, why it is you want to vote for them, and what are the rules and the regulations for what you're doing. I didn't realize a lot of this probably until back in the 2008 or when some of the TV started talking about it, because we don't have same voter day registration here. You know, you can't walk in and register to vote and vote that day. Some states have that. And since we have in the Purdue community a lot of people coming from other places, knowing what the rules and regulations are for here is something that they need to do their homework on in a lot of cases. But it's still a thrill to me. This year, I worked probably 5 days at early, 5 or 6 days at early voting, and we had lines the whole day. Now, the day of election, because everybody voted it early, was kind of a really semi-boring day. So it kind of just varies from state to state and even from county to county.
Thank you, Liz.
I think,
Anyan,
I'm sorry.
Anyan, I was going to say that I think I know this isn't on the voting thing that everybody's talking about, but I think something else that I learned from the film was while I was watching it, as many times as he talked about, you know, to sit in or sit down really means you're standing up. I took it as even one more thing from maybe a perspective of being a white woman is that I can go and sit in and sit down and listen to what's going on from the perspective of someone that isn't like me, so that I can stand with them or stand up for them when they can't stand up for themselves. So I took that more to mean just than what the actual physical component of it was.
Thank you, Carmen. Happy?
As far as one of the things that stood out to me was for voters' rights was what Stacey Abrams did, and the program that she put into place to get the grassroots and have people knocking on doors and making sure people knew to register. She would help, and they would help and get them going, and that was shown in the film too. And then would drive them there and back and really explained everything to them, because I think there was a 80-year-old woman or something like that that hadn't ever voted before, and they took her to get registered and explained the whole thing to her. And I think we need to have more of that.
Thanks, Debbie. I mentioned this in the chat, but I'll bring it up in voice for the group too. There's another really strong documentary from last year that is actually a great complement to John Lewis Good Trouble. That's called All In. For those who might have a Amazon Prime Video subscription, it's on that service to watch, and that goes into even greater detail about Stacey Abrams' recent efforts, but it also provides a very comprehensive history about voter disenfranchisement throughout the entirety of the U.S. history and the different things that were done to disenfranchise in the past as well. So I just wanted to throw out a recommendation if folks are looking for different documentaries to watch about some of the similar topics covered. That's a great one. Wanted to share a couple other things from the chat as well. One participant said, my disabled son got to vote this year and was excited to do so. I was so thankful for where we voted that one of the poll workers took time with him to show him how to vote. And Frank said, I was denied my ability to register to vote because I was a college student. My parents had moved to a different state, and my dorm was my most permanent residence. But the folks running the registrations would not allow me to register to vote in a state where I lived, worked, and studied. So I think, again, that speaks to, this labyrinth of different, laws and rules that cross so many people up and can be frustrating that cause people to abandon the pursuit of it because it might feel fruitless and hopeless. So thank you all for sharing.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about voting and access to voting and laws and policies and different things that we're seeing today?
Hi, this is Esmeralda. One of the things that I think about too is the language barriers that people face and how, unfortunately, the procedures on using an interpreter are not widely promoted. So you're at a disadvantage. Unless you ask, you're not aware that you can take an interpreter. We have students, for example, too, that are bilingual in our community and in other communities that would be interested in helping in this capacity, but yet each county has its own set of policies. And it seems like sometimes this depends on the local board election, which is, I don't, it's just interesting how this all works.
Thank you, Esmeralda.
Ayana, how are you today?
Good, how are you, Andrew?
I am well. For some reason, my camera's not working again. So working in technology, it kind of amazes me that we have one nation, 50 states, and untold number of counties, and we leave the counties in charge of the elections without specific guidance and direction from federal. One of the comments that sat with me during the election was when they went through and said, hey, this is not one election. This is thousands of elections all just going on one day. And I just don't understand how in this day and time, when my face can open my phone or my fingerprint or my voice or all kinds of biometric things, that somebody could not prove who they are through one of those sources, for those people who have that ability, and also for those who don't still have the other system in place. We don't want to disenfranchise based on people's lack of technology. But the fact that we can do all these things with technology that we're, for somebody who does not speak English, and they have the phone that they're using in Spanish, it tells them in Spanish who they're voting for. There's no reason we can't do that. We just don't want to put the money and the time into enfranchising all of the voters. And until we make that a priority, this is going to continue to be a problem.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else? I have one more question for us. Let me find it. So, oh, hold on. So has this documentary expanded your perspective on racial justice and democracy in the United States? If so, in what way? Yeah, go ahead, Dean Underwood. You're good. You don't have to raise your hand, y'all. Just jump on in.
To learn how to raise my hand properly in Zoom. I don't know how to do that. I guess I'd always understood how that voter suppression was horrible, and I had been raised to understand how horrible it was, but I never really framed it in my mind as a way that we could lose our democracy. I did not fear losing our democracy until January 6th. But in this documentary, well before January 6, 2021, John Lewis understood that we could lose our democracy because of voter suppression. And he's right. And I never really understood that. And seeing this film kind of renewed my commitment to just try to do what we can to fix it. I mean, it's terrible that it's harder for some people to vote than others. That is deeply wrong. We risk losing our democracy. Our democracy is in jeopardy because of voter suppression, as well as many other issues. And this film helped me understand that.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just jump in. One thing, another quote from the film that really jumped out to me in regard to this question was, "You only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have." You know, if we are to affect a change that we will see, that we will live to see years down the road, that our families or the people that we care about who come after us, you know, will live to see. I mean, we have to put in that work for it. We have to be vigilant about it. We have to be strategic and tactical about it. You know, because as this film and others have shown, and as Dean Underwood referenced, I mean, this is something that has been systemic, you know, for a long time, and is not just going to go away with the flip of a switch overnight. So I think that vigilance and that, you know, that strategy to keep up the work is something that stood out for me.
Thank you, Nick.
One of the things that I actually learned was it is systemic. It's going to continue, but when we stand up to fight, one of his friends, and I can't think of his name, and he had said that he couldn't go. I mean, he was no longer a teenager. His wife reminded him that. And he said, had he participated in that one thing, he said, I don't have the calmness that John had. And he was able to be calm and nonviolent. He goes, I have a bigger anger level. And he goes, I'd have either been dead or hurt or something. He implied it at least. And what hit me was that something like that nonviolent piece, remember, he took classes to learn how to become nonviolent. That's not something that is even a thought of being offered, as far as I understand. I have never seen anything like that. And becoming nonviolent, and I don't know even if I believe in totally being nonviolent, because although it worked for John, and that was because it was part of his personality, we need to find a way that would work for more people, because it's still a long fight to go. I mean, so I guess that's part of what I reflect on, that we still have a long way to go, and we have to have an attitude, or maybe it is some kind of training on how to behave or something, but I don't see that even in existence. And if it is, it's probably in the white supremacist groups more than anything else. So that's one of the things that I reflect on.
So my background and specialty is in violence prevention work, and I think when we're talking about our own tactics or theories for social change, that everyone has to decide for themselves what they see is necessary, effective, and ethical. As someone who does a lot of violence prevention work, I feel for myself pretty strongly that the process by which we get somewhere is also what we get as the outcome. And so for me, I try to support people in figuring out what are anti-violent and trauma healing methods for doing a variety of things, whether that's organizational leadership or policy design or just interpersonal relationships. But I definitely agree that it's a skill set and it requires the intentionality and practice.
I think it's interesting when we think about like nonviolent tactics. And those were things that were taught to students and people by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. They ran workshops to prepare young people to engage in like freedom rides, where they were preparing to be attacked by white supremacists, have their buses burnt to what them in it, prepared students to sit at counters and be attacked. And one part of me wonders, like, when certain tactics benefit certain people, and I wonder, is it okay for us to say, hey, we know you've been fighting for your liberation for 400, 500 years. We want you to be nice about it. We want you to be nonviolent and peaceful as you fight to live. Because that has an impact on people also, having to just take and continue taking by the same people. Josh?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what you're saying, and one of the quotes that stood out to me was at one point him saying, if I'm doing something wrong, don't beat me, arrest me. And I think, with the nonviolence, it allows one, I mean, in going off of what you're saying about, it benefits certain people and perhaps certain circumstances. I mean, it's an intentional display of, I'm not doing anything wrong. I am exercising my rights. And so if you, beat me or threaten me or arrest me, clearly it's not because I'm doing something wrong. It's, putting the onus back on them, saying that, no, you're the one doing something wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong here.
Yeah, but Josh, I agree with you there. And this isn't just to Josh, it's to everyone. I know personally, I have no problem marching. I have been in protests before, but I am not personally willing. I can't go there knowing that I might have my head beaten in with a bat. It's one of my biggest fears is hurt. I don't want to hurt. So, physically hurt. So at that point, I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. I give so much credit to those who were able to do that, but not all of us could do that and just non-violently take a beating. And I just think I admire them.
I agree with you, Debbie. I admire them too. And even in the film, when they had Jim Clyburn on there, they were talking about the freedom rides, and he had mentioned that, he took a different path than John, and after college, he got married and had a kid, and, his wife was also scared for him, and he didn't partake in some of the early stuff, but still in other ways, he's been involved and had an impactful, had impact on the movement.
I just wanted to jump in with some comments from the chat. Tessa says, I have reflected a lot lately about how to help those who are discouraged or feel disenfranchised about the power of voting to feel more empowered and civically engaged. On the subject of nonviolent protest, Tamara said, Colin Kaepernick tried nonviolence and showed even now it is going to be challenging. That is very true. Obviously has, affected, in his instance, the ability to carry out the occupational pursuit that he has. Klein says, I'm Black and an immigrant from Nigeria, and I've come to realize there were a lot of sacrifices and blood spilled so that people that look like me could vote. and overall that America can live up to the principles it was founded upon. Now, I can't take my vote for granted and must do what I can to ensure democracy here lives on. There's a few more here. Sonia said she was struck by how systemic this is, how a step forward can still be undone, how difficult it is for change to come, and how change can come through nonviolence. I appreciated the displays of dignity, strength, and courage among those determined to make change. And most of all, the film gave me hope. And in some further discussions about anti-violent or nonviolent protest, Sky made a great distinction in the chat to say that anti-violent does not necessarily mean comfortable or non-disruptive. Right? I mean, the barrier is the physical engagement, right? Doesn't mean that it is necessarily a comfortable or non-disruptive protest. And that, you know, we can practice anti-violence in a variety of ways in our daily lives, but enacting systemic change through anti-violence requires building movements and collaborating. So those are just a sample of some comments from the chat. So thanks to everyone for putting your thoughts in there.
I think Debbie also brought up a really important point, which is that, and I think the movie highlights this too, is that there is a lot of different ways that change happens. Like there's not just one right way, and that each of us can think about for ourselves where our strengths, what areas can we contribute, and what areas are we not as effective in, or do we have boundaries, right? So Debbie used the example of like physical harm, and I know for me, I don't mind necessarily experiencing physical harm, but as a trans person, I'm very terrified of being incarcerated. So I try to avoid situations where I might be incarcerated. So I think for every person, you know, it's really about like, where are your strengths? What are your goals? How do you think you can be the most effective and supportive in your own work and in your own life?
Okay, do we have any last comments? Oh, I think
there's a question in the chat related to that, Sky. Jenna asks, do you have recommendations for young people in finding a nonviolent path of protest that also feels powerful? They are rightfully impatient. How do we advise them to find their personal path?
Are you saying that's a question for me? Jenna, are you asking like
well, I'm
just for anybody?
I mean, I think it could maybe be a general question, but.
Yeah, I mean, Skylar, I was thinking you or anybody on the panel. I mean, people who have expertise in doing in this work all the time. And yeah, I mean, you know, but anyone.
I think it's an interesting question, Jenna. I think everyone's path and how they choose to engage is very different. I know like the way that I have engaged in some of these spaces may look very different than Sky's. I know Sky said that she's an active, nonviolent person. I'm not a violent person, but like I'm a little bit more like in your face about things. And so I think for every single person, they have to find like kind of their way. And so and I know that's like a very generic answer, but I know there's a lot of different like young people's organizations. I know there's like youth chapters of NAACP. There's youth chapters of like different socialist groups. There's youth chapters of different like Democratic or Republican groups. Like there's lots of different places where young people can engage with the civic process. And for me, I think that's the big piece, is how do we reconnect our youth to understanding some of their civic responsibilities. Like I think Sky mentioned some of this about education. It's been shocking to me to see how many people don't understand how our government works. and why it's supposed to do certain things and how it's supposed to do certain things. And so how do we find a way to reinfuse that education back into our youth, so that they understand like why things are happening, so they know where to ask questions. 4-H, there you go. Thank you, Mary Jo. 4-H does some work around this stuff too. And so I think if we can insert that education, supplement it if it's not available in schools, offer opportunities for students to engage, take them, if you have an opportunity to go to the Smithsonian museums in Washington, like probably not right now because they're all like fenced off, but when the fences come down, go to like all of them. Like they're amazing. Just spend a couple days and just go to all of them, and you get a really good knowledge, and you get some of that. And I think entitlement, I think it's healthy for people to have, like, you're entitled to be able to have rights in this country. And once you understand like what you're entitled to, then you can help that student shape how they want to exercise that entitlement, and share that knowledge. But I don't have like just one particular way for you.
Yeah, I also want to add, so Ayana talked about like actually getting involved and connecting with organizations like that are youth focused. And I also wanted to add like the component about parenting and like modeling as parents. So before I came to OMP, I would frequently do workshops with parents where we would talk about the importance of teaching children social consent and also avoiding compliance parenting, right? So do it because I told you so. That teaches children not to think for themselves and not to be able to communicate effectively if they have a need that's not being met, right? So if instead, if, for example, if you are like, you cannot eat ice cream for dinner, and your kid is like, why? For the 20th time. Sometimes you can just turn it around and ask them to teach you, okay, well, why have we had this conversation? Why are we not allowed to have ice cream for dinner? It doesn't matter if your kid is 5 or 40, you can have conversations that engage them as a full human being in an age appropriate way, and also teach them modeling good relationships. So for example, parents are not perfect. We make mistakes. So whenever you make a mistake, instead of just being angry or not talking about it, saying, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't realize this is what happened. I can do better next time. Do you want to talk more about it? Right? So anti-violence in a practical way also has to do with like showing good accountability, supporting each other's healing, and like treating each other as like full humans instead of, having compliance-based relationships, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Another comment that Mary Jo offered in the chat was improv groups actually help youth in learning how to think on the fly that can supplement debate team programs, and how to properly debate while being open to new ideas. It's the yes and of improv, and yes and is the idea of being open to ideas, right? This and what else, and kind of how it works in improvisational groups can actually, I see where that would work really well with kind of a complement, as being part of a complement of ways to address that. So thanks, Mary Jo, for offering that.
I think one more thing is having conversations with your family and your children about what's going on. I think oftentimes I've had lots of conversations with people and they're like, can I talk to my kid about racism? I was like, yeah, you can. Like, kids understand things a lot more clearly than we actually think they do. They just don't have the big words that we use to talk about it, but they can tell you when something's right or when something's wrong and when something feels good and it doesn't. And so I think having some of these conversations with young people, having them read different books and do different things like that, that may help them understand how to kind of sit in their discomfort and be able to work through that. Like, I remember reading books as a child that I was very uncomfortable with. I had one book that I took, Road to Memphis. Oh my God, stuck in my mind because it took me 2 months to read a 150-page book because I was really uncomfortable with it. And it was about the freedom rides. And it just made me really sad, but I had to read it. My mother made me keep checking it out from the library until I read it. And then we read it together and talked about it. So how do we practice some of those things that we want our young people to be able to do as adults when they're kids. And some of those things are, you know, may take an extra step from us. And I know it's not like we only have 24 hours, but like, what are some things that we can build in? Like when you have dinner, like, what are you talking about? Do you watch the news together? Do you process what you see on the news with them? Because they talk about these things with their friends. And then you end up like the friends repeat what they hear in their houses. And so you just repeat what you hear. And then how do we help our students develop their own ability to see things, to understand things, to, as my father would say, read between the lines in the newspaper. Like, you get newspapers, like pick a section, read it. What did you read? What did you understand? Okay, now read this other one. Does it say the same thing? Why? Why does it not? So we're teaching some of these critical thinking skills that are critical to be able to have these conversations and engage civically. Because I don't think a lot of these things are being taught anymore in schools.
Ayana, you mentioned books that are good. I know my daughter, I think she was maybe in first or second grade, and they read the book White Water, and that had a huge impact on her life. That was like really the first time she had thought about racism and started to think about it. And she still talks about that book today, and she's in 8th grade.
Yeah, definitely. Some of these things will, like, they have lasting impacts that you won't even realize.
Ayana, hi, I'd like to add a little bit.
Yes, please.
I have 2 sons, white male, 24 and 28 years old now. But through the years, I've talked to them about, you are a white male. You have privilege. You need to be aware of your privilege. You need to look out for others who don't have your privilege. This summer, he really wanted to participate. He lives in Cincinnati at the moment. And he wanted to march with friends in the Black Lives Matter marches this summer. But they were so violent with, you know, the pepper spray and, you know, everything. He ended up not going out. And I told him, if you go out, you need to do this, and prepare, you know, don't be out after dark and things like that. He ended up not going, but we have a lot of conversation, and I try to have him kind of look around at his friends who are there in Cincinnati. They went to Frontier High School, not a lot of color, okay, but I've been here at Purdue for, well, 30 years now, so they would meet people from different cultures, different races, so forth, through me. And at Northern Kentucky University, he's in music school, so he's met and students and professors, LGBTQ, Hispanic, persons of color and stuff. So that's opened his eyes a lot too. And he's very, very accepting of those things. And I think he'll find his path as far as, you know, things that he can do safely to help others. Other things that he's been aware of that he's brought up to my attention before I saw them on the news. He's very much into auto racing, especially IndyCar. And they have this new program that they're establishing, working with minority racing teams and all female racing teams. And he'll send me a message. We message almost every day. And he'll send me a message and he'll say, hey, this is long overdue. Wow, this is great. I'm glad they're doing this. So I tried, as I said, to instill those awarenesses in them. And I hope I'm doing a good job in making them aware and stepping out and helping.
Thank you, Vicki. I think one thing is interesting. You were sharing your concern about your son being involved in movements. And I remember when I was younger, my parents were always very worried because I was really involved with the Prop 187 and Prop 209 legislation that came out in California. And I remember my parents telling me, you are not allowed to leave school and protest. Like, I left school and protest, and I was in downtown LA, which is about half an hour away from Santa Monica where I grew up. And so I think one of the things that my parents made sure I knew how to do regardless, because they knew I was going to do it, was they made sure I knew how to be safe, right? So I remember being young, going to protests with my mom, and like I always had a backpack. There was always water in my backpack. There was money for like payphone. There was like an extra change. There was all these different things that I always carried in my backpack. And so after that, whenever I would protest, I have like a protest backpack that I would always take with me to make sure that if something happened, like there's different ways. Like I had emergency contact information on a sheet of paper that was in there in a Ziploc bag. So if something happened, I got wet, it didn't get destroyed. So like knowing that sometimes like our young people will choose to engage in ways that we ourselves may not be comfortable with. How do we arm them with the skills that they need? Because while we may be scared, they're there and they're living in a very different way than we are. So how do we help? Like as my father would say, I hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Like I'm gonna prepare for you to be out in these streets and be seeing you on the news. I'm going to hope that maybe you may not do that because I'm worried about your safety, but you may do it. So I want you to be prepared, because I think we need people, as Guy was saying, in all different spaces. Like we need people in the streets putting pressure on our society, right? Because that's when things change. The civil rights movement, you know, the Edmund Pettus Bridge images are so vivid, and they're like burned in our consciousness as Americans because they were so violent. And it was such a contrast. But if people hadn't been willing to do that, would we have been able to move as a country? And so part of me is like, maybe not.
I would have felt better if I could have been there with him.
Yeah, it is scary. But I think that's the part, is like we have these young folks, and like I'm really grateful for my parents. Like they never truly stopped me from doing the different things that I wanted. They just made sure like they were scared and worried, but they made sure I was prepared to do it. And they'd be like, if you get arrested, please call. Do not sit there. Like if you get a call, this is who you call immediately. You don't answer any questions, just sit there and just shut up. And then we'll come through and we'll figure it out. And so how do we prepare our students for that level of engagement? Because I think that is also a big piece of what it means to be American. Like America is the product of, for lack of better words, a riot. They threw some tea, some whiskey, some sugar, all kind of stuff in the Boston Harbor, made a mess in the harbor, and they started off America on a riot. And so it's like, rioting and protesting and sharing our voices is part of who we are. I would say it's the cornerstone of who we are as American, depending on how you want to look at things. But we're about to end. Yes.
Just a couple more things, just a couple more chat comments that people had made. Liz had said, when travel is possible again, there are multiple places around the country as part of the Civil Rights Trail. To see the Edmund Pettus Bridge in person can be powerful. If you drive to Florida, take different paths and stop in Selma or the Greyhound Bus Station Museum, et cetera. And Carol also mentioned the 16th Street Baptist Church. So I think I think those living monuments to the work that has been done by so many before are essential to remembrance and inspiration for the work yet to be done as well. So thanks to Liz and Carol for sharing that. Esmeralda also says she agrees with you, Ayanna, the importance of having these conversations with children from an early age, giving them the opportunity to develop their vocabulary, perspective, and voice their thoughts and feelings. In our community, we have children who are embarrassed of their ability to speak Spanish, and what we have found is that it stems from messages, direct and indirect, that they receive. Through a program we help them process these feelings, thoughts, and experiences. So again, just that emphasizing the importance of that expression in the voice that you have and the language that you use, whatever language that may be, is also essential. So thanks, Esmeralda, for sharing. Vicki also mentioned the Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati as a good place to visit. So thank you.
Also, there's some towns in Indiana that are doing a lot of work now to explore their history of being sundown towns, which were towns where Black people were not allowed to be within the town boundaries after dark, or they would be murdered. lynched. So there's a lot of towns across the state of Indiana who are doing some deep work uncovering their history and what it means for them today. So thank you all for joining us for our first event for this week. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So if you would please join us tomorrow for our event at 12 o'clock. That's going to be another great opportunity for us to chat some more and hear from a great panel of some folks who are, engaging in social movements and engaging in social justice work from a very different lens. Sky, did you want to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just briefly. So we've organized a group of Black, trans, and queer folks. We thought that this would be really timely to bring this group of panelists to Purdue to kind of connect historical movements with current movements for civil rights and racial justice from their perspective as Black trans folks, since they are often at the forefront of movements, but also erased from history and their roles in movements. And so it'll just be a really interesting conversation with the panel about connecting history to current movements and also kind of the future where we can move forward in the movement for racial justice and Black lives.
All right, well, have a great day and make good trouble.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.